Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we are here today continuing to revisit the Titans of the Titanfall 2 roster. We're going to be doing that today by taking a look at the sword-wielding maniac, the mascot of the Purple Army, if you will, the one they call Ronin. That's right, it's finally time, ladies and gentlemen, to revisit that short-barrel shotgun sword-wielding maniac. Ronin is an absurdly fun Titan to play. He always has been. I want to get that out of the way right from the get-go. He's a very, very fun Titan once you understand him mechanically. I also think he's one of the least accessible Titans in the game. New players who pick up Ronin typically get shredded in situations where they shouldn't be getting shredded because they haven't mastered or, just developed the nuance that they need to micromanage all of his abilities to survive long enough and then to actually do damage, right? I think the first thing that a new player does is they shoot people, they melee people, and then they realize they can block with sword block. But it's difficult for them to combine those things to a point where they're actually doing damage. So they're either sword blocking infinitely and never able to do damage, or they're just engaging targets infinitely, in which case they're getting shredded because in reality Ronin's actually paper tissue. Not an easy Titan to pick up and play, and I was quickly reminded of that, having not played him in about 3 months. I think the last time I actually played Ronin was when I found out who Dino was. Dino, sort of came onto the scene, and Iniquity was like, hey, Tony, check out this guy Dino. And I was like, oh, man, this dude, just broke down everything about all the Titans. I didn't know any of these things worked the way they did. That was the last time I really replayed Ronin and was good with him. So coming back to him and diving into Titanfall was kind of a kick in the face, and I was like, holy crap. Ronin's actually, he is complex. He is difficult. I think the one thing Ronin does really well is reward people who take the time to understand the nuance of his mechanics. If you get really good with Ronin and you're at that high skill level, you can be rewarded for it by being a force to be reckoned with. But early days, low skill floor, barrier for entry play, man, you can just get annihilated with this Titan. That was something that I think I needed. For a long time, I was a pretty good Ronin pilot. I used to play him a lot, especially when I was actively playing Titanfall 2, every day, 4 hours a day. And it's easy to forget how hard it is to achieve that level of skill. So that's just something I want you guys to keep into mind as we move into the discussion end of the video when we start talking about sword block and ways in which I think a lot of people have suggested, or a lot of ways in which people want to see Ronin changed or nerfed, if you will, going into the future. But let's first talk about Ronin from a visual perspective. I think the design of the Ronin Titan is probably one of the most exciting Titans in the game. Nobody can touch the look of Ion Prime. Ion Prime is pure sex in my heart, pure robot sex. But the appeal of a giant mech that wields a sword can simply not be denied. And it was actually Ronin's sword, as it was wielded by BT, that was the very first Titan weapon we saw when they first teased Titanfall 2. We got that initial teaser trailer, that giant electrified sword just pierced into the ground on the alien planet. We were all like, oh snap, this is about to be crazy. The only way Respawn could have done it better, in my opinion, is if it was a beam saber, but that's probably just speaking as a Gundam fan. Nonetheless, that I think really does represent the appeal of Ronin. In early days, the first couple weeks that the game was out, a lot of people tried to play Ronin, and I think the general consensus that I got from people watching my content at that time was, I can't play this Titan I just can't, man. I can't do anything. I might as well be just whiffing all over the place because I just get annihilated. And he was a very difficult Titan to pick up early days. I think the only people who did well the first several weeks the game was out, even the first month, were people who just kind of were able to feed on people who really didn't know what they were doing. It was the only way you did good with Ronin in early days was because you went up against someone who had no idea what they were doing with a different Titan. No one was really fully understanding all of his mechanics, the capabilities of sword block. That took, I think, another month or two before we started to recognize what sword block could block. Things that you needed to do to stay alive. For example, sword blocking when you phase shift so you don't get telefragged. The importance of electric smoke and just ways in which you could hit and run. And then, again, for me, it was a big deal when I found Dino and I started watching Dino's content, and all of a sudden it was I think that was where everybody sort of elevated with Ronin. And we started to see a lot more Ronins, and we have been seeing a lot more Ronins over the last 3 or 4 months. And when I say a lot more Ronins, I mean a lot more relatively good Ronins. I still run into that guy who just walks up to me when I'm playing Scorch and just eats my entire Inferno shield and then gets executed by me. But occasionally, you play against that Ronin who just seems damn near untouchable. They dash all over the place. They're reload canceling. They went to Dino's school of Ronin mastery, and they just know every single facet of the Titan. And that was when we started to better understand when Ronin, what Ronin could block. Again, people started breaking down the damage numbers, and we saw that Ronin can mitigate 75% damage, that pretty much all of Scorch's abilities could be mitigated massively by Ronin. And that was when I think he became, like, next level, right? It was just a matter of people actually spending time with the Titan and getting good with him. I don't think at any one point he actually became overpowered by design. People just better understood how to play him. And now we stand here today. Ronin is a Titan that I think gets talked about nearly every day. I know it does in my stream. We've had consistent discussions about what should be done with sword block, what should be done with sword core, a million different opinions and ways in which we think Ronin should be nerfed, I think is the #1 thing here, right? Few people are standing there and being like, Ronin should definitely be buffed. He needs a buff, guys. Can we get a buff on sword core, please? Very few people think that. I think most people going, against Ronin are saying, let's do something about sword block. So I've been thinking heavily about that the last 2 days. And I think most of you know that my stance for probably the last few months has been that sword block's 360-degree capabilities should be completely removed. If you don't know already, sword block does block 360 degrees. Now, you don't get the same damage reduction from behind as you do from the front, but nonetheless, it allows you to go into a fight, be engaged at 360 degrees, and then actually make a getaway without ever actually facing your target. This makes it much easier to simply dash in the direction you want to go. It really is a big creature comfort, to be able to leave a fight and actually look where you're going rather than having to dash backwards like you would if you were making escape, and still be able to mitigate and block damage. So for me, it was a lot of like, maybe we just remove that, right? Like, get rid of the 360 degrees and Ronin will be perfectly fine. The more I think about that, the more I question just how much that change would actually do. I have to say, I'd still like to see it happen, because I do think it would make more sense for Ronin pilots to have to actually turn, face their target, and kite out of the fight. I think mechanically that would make Ronin actually a little bit more fun to play. I know I would enjoy that. And it would be less frustrating for new players making their way into the game who are shooting at this Titan as he's running away, wondering why they're not killing him. Like, we have no real visual representation for the fact that Ronin is actually blocking damage from you while he's running away and his sword is in front of him. As a new player, you're not going to understand that. You're going to have to wait until someone tells you, you actually go out and search for it, or by chance you realize that he is somehow mitigating damage when he's looking away from you. So I still feel like I'd like to see that change happen. I think we should have maybe like a 180 degree, 160 degree cone on a sword block. I don't want to see it be like 30 or 40 or 60 even. If Ronin is facing someone, he should be able to pretty much block all of that. The idea of his sword moving around, blocking shots, I'm 100% on board with that. But I think going further, some of the things that would need to be done to make him feel less frustrating in certain situations against other players is to look at the individual situations where sword block is legitimately way too powerful. Scorch comes to mind time and time again. As I mentioned earlier, Ronin can block just about everything Scorch does. I mean, Ronin is the only Titan that can actually stand in Scorch's thermite. Like 2 full canisters can be on the ground, Ronin can stand in it and just mitigate insane amounts of damage. It doesn't make sense for a sword, a physical item, to be able to block something that is actually touching the Titan in other parts of his body. He's standing in fire. How is the sword blocking it? There's no visual representation for that effect, and I just think it doesn't need to be there. It makes Ronin excessively powerful against Scorch. Even the best Scorch player is going to lose to a relatively good Ronin player. It's just all about patience. The Ronin just has to play a waiting game, wait for Scorch's Inferno Shield to be down, use that sword block to mitigate any sort of thermite damage, and he can just slowly eat the Scorch alive. And if he gets Sword Core, forget about it. 95% damage reduction, he's just going to tear the Scorch to pieces. It's situations like that that I think make Ronin extra frustrating. It's very specific situations. It's not a general concept of like sword block is broken. It's just those individual moments. That's what I'd like to see Respawn sort of redefine and tweak. At the very least, if they kept the 360-degree sword block, I'd love to see a visual representation for it. Let's do away with the fact that this sword is magically blocking damage on the ground and damage behind this Titan, and give us some sort of a holographic representation of a shield. Maybe just coat Ronin in electricity and say, hey, guess what? He's coated in electricity. He blocks all of this damage, and so on and so forth. It's those types of changes that I would like to see going forward that would make Ronin just a much more easy-to-read Titan for new players especially. And I do think it's important that we still think about that, especially with Origin Access right around the corner. We're going to have a lot of new pilots coming into the game. I'd love for an update to be dropped by then where people actually know what the hell Ronin can and can't block, at least mostly from what you actually see on screen. So there you have it, guys. My current thoughts on the state of Ronin as I revisited him. Again, I think it's just so important. I think he's a Titan that is in a relatively good place otherwise, right? Apart from those few instances where Sword Block just blocks way too much stuff, I think he's in a really good position. And a lot of it, for me, again, has to do with that barrier for entry. This is not an easy Titan to play. You really have to be micromanaging your abilities, your sword core, especially using it in the right situations, sometimes using it to tank, sometimes using it for damage, making use of your phase shift and all of your dashes to be very mobile. He is very hit and run, very guerrilla warfare. It's not easy to be a great Ronin. I don't ever want great Ronins to somehow feel like they're not being rewarded for all the work and the effort that they put into being good at that Titan. That's the number one thing that has to be maintained going forward with him. And that's how I feel about Ronin currently. I'd love to hear what you guys think about Ronin. Let me know your thoughts on Sword Block. I think that's probably the biggest topic of discussion. Again, we talk about it on stream all the time, so there's my revised position on it. I'm okay with the 360 degrees. If that stuck around, it wouldn't be the end of the world. I think, in reality, removing the 360 degrees could potentially harm newer players who are less skilled, making the barrier for entry on Ronin even higher. So it's more important that I think we look at those individual situations where Sword Block is just too good. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, feel free to leave all of your thoughts down in the comment section below. And as always, remember to play smart, remember to play to challenge yourself, but most importantly, remember to play for fun.